it's only in Monterey could you find a golf course that I didn't know about. So completely amazing. I lived here for 7 years. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I particularly enjoy the chance to talk about entrepreneurship and especially strange kinds of entrepreneurship, which I think is the main category I fit into. I want to start here, actually. I'm the founder of 2 different companies, well, at least 2 companies that are running. I had another company that went out of business around September 11, 2001 or so, when a lot of other companies went out of business. Snibbe Interactive is a company that makes gestural, immersive, interactive experiences, and Scott Snibbe Studio is a company that produces interactive apps. One of the big reasons I came down here is because I really believe that business is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, ways for people in today's culture to express their creativity. It's one of the few avenues for people who have an idea that doesn't make sense anywhere else. It doesn't make sense in the arts. It doesn't make sense in academics. It doesn't make sense even in the current business world. And yet, our especially our country and our culture is one that really values risk-taking and very wild ideas. So I'm here just to cast my work in the context of how it ended up turning into a couple of relatively successful companies, but also especially to encourage people here. I know there isn't as much entrepreneurship here, obviously, as there is in San Jose and Palo Alto, San Francisco, etc. But there isn't really a reason that there couldn't be. And I like to talk about someone who had an enormous influence in my life. So this is Gary Kildall. He was the dad of my best friend when I was growing up here in Monterey. And he was like the Bill Gates of the 1970s. He invented the first operating system for microcomputers. So he actually had essentially a monopoly on operating systems from about 1973 to 1980 or so. And there's long stories about him versus Bill Gates and DOS and so on. But mainly what I want to just talk about is what an incredible influence he was. And he was an entrepreneur here in Monterey. He founded this company. He was getting he had a postdoc at the Naval Postgraduate School. And people were, at the time, trying to figure out this problem of how do you connect a disk drive to a computer to a display. I mean, it sounds a bit primitive. And because in those days you just buy a computer and then you have to buy a disk drive and then buy a display and then write your own software to connect them all together, which it sounds a bit absurd. And so he created a program called CPM, Control Program for Microcomputers. And a company called Digital Research, which was originally called Intergalactic Digital Research, actually, which kind of, that's its 1970s roots. But Gary was such an incredible person. He was just an incredible genius who created a lot of the technologies that are now mainstream, obviously from the operating system to many other things like multimedia. He was working on CD-ROMs with really big discs, in the 1980s, the late 80s. And he gave me my first job. Me and my buddy Scott, well, my best friend was also named Scott. We worked at his company, and I had published software when I was, I guess, like 11 or 12 years old. I had software that was actually, published on discs, and people were buying it. And Gary just he didn't really believe in any limitations. Anything we wanted to learn, he would just sit down and explain. And he's a really incredible, well-rounded model of a successful person, because he was both successful in his business and financially, but also he's a real gentleman and a charismatic person. He's somebody who there'd be a room of 150 people having a good time, and he'd spot the one person who is a little bit lonely in the corner and go over to that person, and they'd be laughing and having a ball in a few minutes. So he died young in 1994. So I just wanted to honor him, and I recommend that you guys who don't know about him go and read about him. He's really one of the great entrepreneurs and great people who's lived in recent history. So that takes a little bit from my work, but I think really important to mention. So I think a lot of us forget that none of us actually perceive reality. Right now, each one of us has 5 sensory streams going into our brains: sight, smell, touch, hearing, taste. And each of us is reconstructing reality. All we see is a model of reality. None of us are actually seeing each other or this room. We're seeing, it's like the Matrix, right? You're seeing a reconstructed 3-dimensional reality in your brain of what your brain imagines that you're seeing. And the reason that I'm saying this is not to, put you on a little trip or something, but is because actually, I'll make a little transition here. We also forget that we do have a sixth sense, which is also in our brain, which is our imagination, our memory, our creativity. And because the brain works in this way of just reconstructing a reality, it's possible to create an infinite number of alternate realities. And ordinary people have seen them in the past when we dream, when we hallucinate, when we imagine, when we perceive works of art. But once computer programming, computer software, and computer graphics emerged, all of a sudden there was a way to create an interactive alternate reality of anything a person could imagine, as long as you have the power to type it up. And that's what got me into computers when I was about 10 years old. Before I had my own computer, I was typing at the Pacific Grove Middle School library, and there was actually no disk drive or no tape drive, so I would actually write out my whole program on paper at the end of the day if it wasn't working, and then I'd have to come back and retype it in. And one of my old friends from middle school recently emailed me, and he said, I used to see you furiously working that computer in Pacific Grove Middle School, and I always wondered what you were working on. And it's like, and now I know, I see your website. But that's how I always perceived computers, was a kind of reality projector, that you could create any form of reality on that screen. Because that screen is just like a movie screen, it could be any pattern of light and movement. So a lot of my career is about pushing the boundaries of what is possible on a computer screen. I like to show a couple of things that influenced me. There was this program called Pinball Construction Set. This really influenced me when I was a kid. I got this, in 1983 or something. And it was this game where it was a kind of meta game. You could take all the different parts of a pinball machine and put them in, and then turn the pinball machine on. So the first thing that I did was put 100 flippers, and see what a pinball machine is like with 100 flippers. But that kind of program really turned me on because it's infinite. It's only limited by kind of your own imagination, your own creativity. It's not just a model of an ordinary pinball machine, but the person who wrote this program had the insight to understand that, hey, if I'm going to make a pinball program, why not make every pinball machine, the possibility of creating any pinball machine, and also ones that aren't possible in our physical world. There was also, this program came out as a follow-up called Music Construction Set, and this really excited me too. I think for any of you guys who are into music, there's a moment when you buy sheet music for something you love. For me, it was like the Beatles, New Order, things like that. And you start putting it in and you realize, wow, this is music the same way Bach made music. So I love this because they didn't cast this program as a tool for professionals. It was a game. It was something just to play and have fun with. And I think anything that you can cast as a form of play all of a sudden makes it interesting. The universe itself is really quite interesting, but something about our educational process sometimes really flattens it out. And when you say science often to people, they often kind of start to get sleepy. But what is science? It's the exploration of our entire universe, like everything in the whole universe, from black holes to our psychology and love, and et cetera. So I'm really interested in finding ways to communicate these things like these guys did in the 80s that preserves our excitement about things. One of the people who's best at doing that is Steve Jobs, who I'm sure you guys all know of. Someone asked him a while, long after he introduced the Macintosh, how did you come up with so many great ideas? And why is everybody always copying you? For like Bill Gates, it seems like he just copies everything you do. And he said, well, I'm not really to thank for my ideas. It's simply because I've had a variety of life experiences. And he said, if Bill Gates had done some of the things I did, like go live in an ashram, he studied Buddhism in Palo Alto. He had a Zen a Zen teacher. He took these typography classes. He just went to school, but he felt too constrained by even being in a degree program. So he was just, and also he didn't have enough money. So he just was kind of on campus, popping in and out of classes and not doing the assignments, but just absorbing all the information. Sorry, I'm not necessarily recommending that to those of you who are students, but it worked for him. And, and he took this typography class and was completely blown away by the sophistication of how letters are formed. He also recommends taking acid, too. He said if Bill Gates had taken acid, he might have had even more ideas, which I don't necessarily recommend. I never took acid, and although my dad was really encouraging. My dad's here, actually. If you don't want your kids to take drugs, the best way is to really encourage them to do it. But there was something that I really didn't like, actually, about the Macintosh when it came out. And that was the whole desktop interface. Everyone was so excited about Windows desktop, but I thought, what's the one thing in my house I've never taken a picture of? What's the most boring thing in my house? Like my desk or my dad's desk. Like, why would you take that as a metaphor for something that's like a movie screen? Why would you take something so cool as computers and turn it into a desk? And I think that's why I'm really excited by what's happened with computers, because I was always kind of pushing against that with my own career. But now you see it in the mainstream, especially with the iPad and the iPhone. The whole interface is based on the way movies are structured rather than the way a desk is structured. So you'll have wipes, dissolves, all of these fades, transitions. Everything that you see from the language of movies is now in the language of at least Apple's interface. I also want to talk a little bit about something that also influenced me, which was abstract film. I went to school at Brown University and also the Rhode Island School of Design, and I got introduced to some of these filmmakers from the 1920s and 30s. Do some people know about this at all? No? A couple people, cool. The film professor. So this is a film by Oskar Fischinger, or an excerpt of a film called Study Number 8, and it's to the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And when I saw these films, I was really blown away because, to me, they have an amazing emotional power. Like, when I watch these films, I feel like this, actually, like an incredible sense of elation and wonder. And that surprised me because there's not a picture of a person. You don't see a person smiling. It's not like Brad Pitt or something. But still, it gives you an emotional impression, even the full range of emotion, from kind of sadness to joy. And so I really wanted to try to take some of these ideas and translate them to computers and computer interfaces, because it's really easy to make lines and dots and things like that on a computer screen. And you'll see when I show you some of the work. I like to show this because then it's not like I came up with all these ideas. All I did was remix the stuff that I've been exposed to. But I really encourage you, to take Steve Jobs' advice, which is to go very, very broadly to pursue your interests, especially into the literature and the arts, because there's so much there's such a refined. I mean, the arts and literature are so refined, and there's so much competition. Whereas other fields are much more immature. Like even computers are still very immature. So if you look at mature media, you can often get much more sophisticated ideas for approaches to the less mature one. This is a film strip from a film by Len Lai. He made films by scratching directly on film, so making films without a camera. This is a clip from Free Radicals, and again, this is just. I'm just showing you some of the times that really blew me away in my life, moments where I was opened up to a whole new reality. And it seems simple, just these scratches, but the way they move three-dimensionally, to me, was extremely powerful in a way that was different than Oskar Fischinger, because to me it's almost like watching somebody think, like getting inside somebody's mind and seeing like the movement, the transformation, whereas Oskar Fischinger is like very composed, more like watching the product of a great composer, but this is more like going to a jazz performance at the Blue Note or something and seeing somebody doing a once-in-a-lifetime kind of performance. And so that way of using your body to create is also something that really influenced me. I wasn't the first one. Oscar Fischinger also tried to make these kind of real-time instruments. This is a sheet of rubber that you push into called the lumograph that he developed in the 1950s. He even patented it. He only really made one and never made money on them. So I feel bad for him. And I like to show this, though, because I think the entrepreneurial urges of these artists is quite interesting. This is Marcel Duchamp, who I bet some of you know. He's the founder of conceptual art. Basically, anything that happened in art in the last 100 years started with him. And he created these things in the 1930s, interactive art. They're called rotoreliefs. They're discs that you mount on a spinning motor, and they create illusions like color illusions, optical illusions, pattern illusions. And he even showed them at a trade show. That's what I love. He went to this show called the Concours Le Pain, and he was right next to the first food processor and the first trash compactor, and then this was right in the middle. He didn't sell any either. And here's another failure, unfortunately, at least commercial failure. This was called the home clavilex, before the television, 1930. This is a device for abstract visual imagery, this beautiful, colorful imagery. It looks a lot like that. Well, in fact, it looks exactly like that. This is actually a still, though, from a movie called The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. Some of you guys saw that? It's kind of a cool movie because they use his device and they filmed it because they've got a character in the movie they're having a hard time visualizing, which is God. And so they decided to use this device called the clavilex to represent him or her. So he made 18 and they didn't sell very well either. So it's a long introduction, but I think it's important because you guys will hopefully go and track down some of those leads, and it explains a little bit where I'm coming from. This was the first thing that I showed publicly. I didn't really know what to call it. I used to call them useless programs, a little bit defensively, because I was working in this computer lab, 3D computer lab, and everyone wanted to make everything three-dimensional virtual reality. And I found that so boring because if you study art, there's so many, monocular perspective is a very, very small slice of the history of art, a very, very, very small, narrow slice of the way we can represent things. And yet in 3D computer graphics, they just focus on that way of representing things. So I was really interested in two-dimensional graphics. I remember showing this once to my professor and saying, look, you can make animations with your hand. There's this new way of making animations, which I'll show you from this kind of amateur video from the 90s. And my professor, I remember, said to me, 2D is a solved problem. Depending on who you are, that can be helpful or harmful. Because to me, whenever someone criticizes me, it's more like a challenge, to show how it is useful or there's that people would enjoy it. So this was a program to create these type of animations, these abstract animations, just using gesture. So you move using a mouse with these really expensive workstations. That's like $80,000 of equipment in the 90s. And not only can you create abstract animations just based on your gesture, your movement. So all of a sudden, anybody can become this kind of abstract artist. But you can connect to other people. So and this was before the web. So you could have it was a very strange kind of World Wide Web where you could just go and connect to another person and have a kind of abstract visual conversation. It's a strange idea, but people really liked it. And they spent a lot of time with it. And, recently I've found ways of commercializing these things. This is an app version. Actually, I'll show you really quickly. There's an app called Motion Phone now, the same thing, but a little more polished. And it does the same thing. It lets you choose from different shapes and different colors. And you create movement under your fingertips. So you can see. You can also do this to music and so on. You see, you can really quickly improvise and create animations. And then you can connect to another person. So you can go online using like Apple's Game Center, and then you can connect to other people and have this abstract conversation together. It's also a world that you can zoom in and out of this world and have different conversations at different places. So. But I'd like to talk a little bit about how I got there, because I was so passionate about these kind of interactive two-dimensional systems without really understanding what they might be good for. I mean, again, I would call these things useless programs, but then I'd say, well, it's as useless as a song or a story or something of that nature. The challenge was how to show these things and how to distribute them. I was in a lot of art shows, and you'd have this kind of thing with flat screens and mice, which looks a little clunky. And then they started having touch screens with a stylus, and as long as nobody steals that, it's fine. Then I had this idea in the 90s. Everybody around this area in Northern California, I think everybody has an idea for a company. If you live in LA, everyone has a script they're working on. but here, everybody has an idea for a company. So I had this idea. I was like, what if you shrunk this down? We have computers this small. I mean, people would just love to do this, and it would be very relaxing. We could put the touch screen on the back and the screen on the front. Nobody was interested in funding this at the time. And admittedly, I didn't have the whole picture. I didn't have the idea of making it a phone. Also, that would have been a really, really good idea. So I put these things in art shows, but I didn't really have it in my heart that much to do this kind of thing where you take a laptop apart and put it on a wall and sell it for $20,000, and then it breaks in about 5 years. I was more looking for a way to distribute this type of work to a mass audience. And then again, it happened. Once the iPad and the iPhone came out, I was able to release a bunch of these apps. And this was the first one that became a bestseller called Gravelux. And it's this app where you touch the screen and you exert a kind of gravitational attraction. So it's a way of drawing with stars. And I was really surprised. This got, I think, 600,000 downloads or something. A lot of different people getting it. And the nice thing about the App Store is that all of a sudden you don't really have to justify your idea or even explain what it is. You just have to, make it bug-free and give it a name and put it in some category. And all of a sudden there's a market for it. So I released 3 of these at first. This one's called Bubble Harp, and it's a kind of visual musical instrument. So you can draw, and what it does is it creates these songs out of your drawings. It sounds nicer with a pentatonic scale. So you draw and you create these kind of diagrams that are just based on your movement. It then draws these diagrams that are based on the pattern of cells or bubbles, and then it plays a musical composition based on the length of the lines and how long you spent drawing. There's another of these. They're all based on nature, but you can't really find these things in nature so much. I just use the mathematics of nature as the basis to create a kind of interactive experience. So this is a drawing program where you draw with ants. There you go. There you go. And you see, just like real ants, they start to get off track. It's very, yeah. So around that same time I was making those programs in the 90s, the recent ones I made just a couple of years ago, I adapted them to the iPad. But I also started doing the same kind of work in physical space, so using just your body as an interface. Because when I started showing things in galleries, I realized it was a bit frustrating because as soon as you come up to something on a screen, your body shrinks down to just one eye and one finger. That's all you're really become aware of. So I really wanted to make a way of using the computer that used your whole body as the interface, and all you had to do was move through space in order to experience it. So this was the first thing I made called Boundary Functions, and it's a floor, and when you walk on it, it draws these lines between people. So if there's one person, nothing happens, which is kind of interesting. Then if there's 2, there's one line between you. And the more and more that walk on the floor, the more interesting it gets. This diagram is called a Voronoi diagram. It's kind of mathematically defined diagram. And as I mentioned, these diagrams are the pattern of bubbles, the pattern of cells. They describe the gravitational influence of stars and even the patterns that dogs pee in. But they're particularly interesting when you project them around people because they show you your personal space. And what you see, there's a reason why there's nothing that happens when one person is around, because what this piece shows you is that you actually don't have any personal space until somebody else is around. So that's a kind of undercurrent of a lot of the work that I do, is to try to show how reality is kind of mutually created and interdependent. And it's part of why I like to make interactive art, because often today we give ourselves a little too much credit for our success. You see this in a lot of our political debates too, with some people saying, like, all you need to do, I did it, I became whatever, CEO of this company, so you can too. But in fact, we're all dependent on everybody else. Like, you basically have only other people to thank for your own success in life. And that's what I like. I like to convey that idea with a lot of my installations by making things that are completely require social participation and interaction. I do a lot of work with wall projections. This was also one of the very first ones, called Deep Walls. And this is a wall. I just wanted to make a way of making a movie with your body. So this is a piece where you walk in front of this wall, and as soon as you enter, it starts to record your body, and as soon as you leave, it stops. It seems really obvious once you've heard it, but the way most interfaces work to make a movie, it would be like a photo booth, where it gives you a countdown of, say, 3, 2, 1, and then you have 30 seconds to do whatever you want. Now, the problem with that is that it puts a computer in control of you. And you'd really like you to be in control of the computer, especially as they get smarter and smarter. So that's what it does here, and it's in a kind of effortless way. The computer's just doing what you'd expect. Somehow I walk in front of this, and it makes movies out of my motions, and I don't even really deconstruct how and why that begins and ends. Something interesting about this, too, is that it really promotes a change in people's social behaviors. So people start to get wilder and wilder. It's kind of like breakdancing or something. Like, if I told all of you one by one, dance in front of this whole room, nobody would do it, right? Maybe one of you. But if I turn this installation on in here, in turn, each of you would go and dance in front of each other, without prodding. So something I started to learn as I made more and more of this interactive art is that it has the capability to actually change people's behavior. For the good, for the bad, for the energetic, or even to slow people down, which I'll show in a little bit. This is a piece that moves more towards telling a story. My ultimate kind of goal or dream for this medium is to make experiences like movies, but where you participate or you drive the story forward. So this is one of my first experiments in that. It's just a scene. It's more like a visual poem, an animated or interactive poem rather than a story. But what happens is you have this guy pulling a piano. It's inspired by this surrealist film called Un Chien Andalou by Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel. And it's kind of remixed, like an interactive remix of that film. So when you touch this guy for long enough, he starts to dissolve into ants. And somehow this piece actually needs less explanation than any of the other ones I did, even though it's a little weirder. Somehow it's a kind of archetypal image of pulling a piano and being eaten by insects. People know what that means. And this gradually evolved into more and more sophisticated and large-scale pieces. If any of you have been to the international terminal at LAX, I bet some of you have seen this. Yeah, a couple of you guys have. That's really nice that people have seen it. It's a really widescreen movie. It's 58 monitors. So we made this 30,000 pixel long movie. It's not interactive because they wouldn't let me put my own camera in the airport. they only want their cameras in the airport. But it is kind of uplifting, and it's a kind of story. It begins with a mother running after her child, which is familiar to everybody who has a kid. And then it moves into a kind of mundane reality where people are just walking by in ordinary life. So, why would you depict that? But then they start to break into dance. So it's in LA, and we've taken all the different styles of dance, like from hip hop to classical, ballet, punk, and then they finish their routine and how to move forward. So yeah, it's up for permanently. Whatever permanent. I always laugh when people say permanent. And then it gets a little surreal. Like this guy who acts like Pac-Man, and he just absorbs people. Or she moonwalks, and then other people are born out of her. So it breaks into. I find surrealism a really good influence. If you haven't exposed yourself to, we were lucky. We had these surrealist books of, like, a woman. It was weird. It was like a butt that was a woman's face. All these Magritte images, of a burning fireplace, and the burning instrument that really freaked me out, like a cello just burning by itself. But those instruments, they stay in your mind, and they come up later and as in different ways. But the idea here was just to uplift people in the airport. There's so many people in an airport, it could be like a Lollapalooza or something, right? Every day it could be Lollapalooza at the airport. But instead, it's people are scared, bored, lonely. So it's meant to be a kind of fantasy that uplifts people while they're waiting or whatever they do at the airport. Obviously, you might be asking, what does this have to do with business? We did make some money with the apps, but I started another company called Snibbe Interactive that tried to commercialize these types of interactive experiences. And this is a kind of good example of a commercialization of that kind of shadow technology, because we've got this issue with obesity and childhood obesity in our country right now. And so they want to make all these exhibits about it. So what would be worse than to have an exhibit about obesity where people kind of sit on their butt and like touch it, read about it on a touch screen? So people come to us, how can we make exhibits to teach people about this and also actually get them moving while they do it? So you walk in front of that space, and then it captures you in a loop, and it plays over and over. It shows you the calories burned, how fast you're moving, your stride length. And what happens is people do it over and over again and try to be the most inefficient possible. So they start doing very, very silly, weird walks. This is one of the probably most commercial applications we have, because people want to browse information, but it's much more interesting and effective to do something socially than alone, for communication. So we made this interface where it's a kind of Ouija board interface where you can move this selector and then flip around a tile and find out what's behind it. You can see how much more interesting this is than reading a pamphlet or something. And it actually is effective. There's this thing, Lao Tzu says, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And that's the benefit of interactivity. If you actually do something, you're more likely to remember it. So this is another kind of more cinematic experience. This is trying to teach people about this. There's this experiment where they run electricity through a vat of chemicals that resembled the early oceans, and then they get amino acids. They're trying to figure out, they were like kind of mad scientists in the 1950s, a little bit Frankensteinish, trying to create life. And they did create the building blocks of life, but it's invisible, it's microscopic, so it's pretty boring and hard to explain to kids. So they had us make an exhibit about this where you go into this space, you get struck by lightning, you turn into a cell. The cells are non-living cells that move upwards. And then there's this moment where a cell becomes alive as kind of words about the origins of life enter into it. Because nobody actually knows how that moment occurred when we went from non-self-replicating to self-replicating life. I'm really proud of this exhibit because I think it could be in a creationist museum or in a science museum. It actually lets you kind of think about that moment, because there's a lot of dogma on both sides, but it's such a mystery. It's such a mystery how that transition occurred on our planet, and it's nice to actually be able to talk about it without being defensive. And then, we moving. I studied film, so as you can probably tell. So I'm really excited about working more and more with the film industry, and we worked with James Cameron on a couple of exhibits recently about that movie, Avatar. We brought a bunch of the technologies to life, the technologies that they used to make the movie and also technologies that were in the movie. One of them is this great scene where you had these wood sprites that land on your body. So this encourages you to move slowly. If you move slowly enough, then the wood sprites come and land on you. So you have to be gentle. Otherwise, they move away. This is about as close as you can get to a kind of holodeck experience, if you're into Star Trek. But, you're still there in space. You still see your body and your friends. There's James Cameron made shots himself. He had his own kind of virtual camera. So we made a robust version of this that you can use in an exhibit where you use the same scenes he did. And you can try making your own version of a shot and then compare it to James Cameron's. And we made these tables. These tables are particularly effective because it's a social way of browsing large amounts of information. I mean, could you imagine having a bunch of books on a table or something in an exhibit? They obviously get really dirty and stolen quickly. But this is a way that the images are perfect and very vibrant, and you can share things socially with people and move them around. So it's a great way of looking at tons and tons of information, but fitting it into a physical context. Like you could see it at the aquarium there without, interfering with your physical experience of those fish. This is the coolest and the most new technology, where you just move in space, and we have all these cameras that track all your most subtle movements and then map them to the characters in the movie. So you get to be like those actors in Avatar, and even interact with parts of the scene. I was scared because James Cameron had a kind of bad reputation for yelling at people, but he was so happy when he saw this stuff. Once you have like 5 out of the top 10 best-selling movies, mellow out. I did a bunch of research with interactive music. This was also back in the 90s, and again, just pursuing this stuff because it was fun. This was a time when DJs were becoming big and electronic music was coming big. So we had this idea that you could make a kind of video game where you make music yourself. And so this controls like the pitch, the filter, the volume, and you can make loops without having to be an expert at music creation. And that was more a deal that got scuttled by lawyers rather than anything else, because we were close to a game deal with Sony to do this, but the lawyers working at the company where I was working wanted a 3-game deal, and they offered us a 1-game deal. So, but it's okay because the iPad came out, and so we have a version. we totally rewrote it. And made a kind of new, more refined version called Oscilloscope. And after I released all those apps, they got attention from a lot of different people, and one of them was Bjork. I think. Oh no, I don't have her here. So she invited me and a few other people to work with her on this app called Biophilia. And it was kind of a combination of a lot of the things I was personally interested in a smaller way. And she had a really big idea, which is to make a whole album where every song corresponds to some aspect of science, of nature, and also to music and also to technology. She's one of the, I think, few people in the world that believe that technology is a way we can get closer to nature rather than further away from it. And her music certainly expresses that with electronic music. But she wanted to do that in a form that also involved visuals and interactivity. So this is the app. The interface is actually like a galaxy. It's a very unique kind of interface. And you can zoom in to any of these constellations to see one of 10 interactive apps. I'm just going to show you a couple of them because I know we're running a little low on time. But this is an app called Virus. So this is as if you could touch everything under the microscope. So you can grab the individual nuclei and drag these cells around. And as you do, these viruses are coming in, attacking the central cell. So this is a song about viruses that Bjork wrote. Maybe the first song about viruses. I don't know. So you can see those other cells sing along, the central cell. The central one's not singing because it's getting attacked. And it's kind of like a game here. So you can protect the cell. You can throw these viruses away. But if you do, what happens is the song actually gets stuck. So you get 2 verses into the song, and then it goes into a kind of instrumental loop. So it's a game that you have to lose in order to hear the whole song. You have to let the cell get attacked. And that was really important to Bjork because she wanted to convey that nature isn't just pretty trees, and it's violent and dangerous, especially in Iceland, where she comes from. So this project is meant to also be educational, but it's often best to sneak up on people and teach them something when they don't know about it. Like with James Cameron's Avatar movie is a great example. So in this case, it teaches you about how a viral infection actually occurs. So I bet there's a couple people in the audience who don't know exactly how this works. It was only discovered recently, in fact, just in the last, 40, 50 years. So the viruses inject DNA into the cell. So then you have DNA coming at the nucleus. And again, you can kind of fend it off by pushing the nucleus around, but then again, you're stuck 3 verses into the song. So you have to let the whole thing proceed, and you see exactly how a cell gets infected. Right. So how many people would say, like, wow, cool, after a biochemistry lecture? Okay. So I'll just show you a couple more of these because I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. This is another app that we worked on called Thunderbolt. And this app is about lightning, so you can create these sparks. It's nice to make it loud. You can make sparks. You can draw with lightning. It's kind of like a lightning drawing program. But the main purpose is to create arpeggios. So you see, if you put your fingers close together, you just get 1 note or 2 notes, then 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes. And that's what an arpeggio is, if you don't know. It's a sequence of notes that plays over and over again. And if you go higher, it goes faster. And lower, it goes slower. And if you put more fingers down, you can make them non-sequential. So we're reaching a point in time where learning about anything, including music or science, is all of a sudden becoming something none of us have ever seen before. This is like the birth of a medium. This is like when opera was invented or when movies were invented. All of a sudden we have music, computers, cinema, all crashing together into a brand new medium. And this is one of the very first feature-length experiences that explores that idea. I mean, it's a really wild and weird one, looking at nature through this lens of music. But the thing is, now you don't have to convince anybody that you have a good idea. I could never sell this idea to anybody, and I doubt Bjork could either if she tried to get somebody to fund it. But once you make it, people love it. It's amazing. It has millions of people interested in and using it, and even making money.